Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Brian Kamenetzky and Andy Kamenetzky. The rumors are out there, Andy, and sometimes you see ones that make some sense. This one from Marc Berman at the New York Post talking about New York Knicks free agent Reggie Bullock. Had a really good season with them as a kind of a swingy 2-3 guy who shoots the three-pointer really well. In terms of where Bullock might be going, the Lakers, for whom Bullock has played, have Bullock on their list. Not surprising.
No, he makes perfect sense. The Lakers could use more true wings. That's what Reggie Bullock does. He is a very, very good shooter. He is also a very capable defender. The Lakers are familiar with him. He is, on top of being a useful player for what the Lakers would need, he is a really good guy. Like he is a high character, great locker room guy that makes a lot of sense for the Lakers. I understand exactly why he would be on their list, assuming their list includes people that it will be very difficult for them to get financially.
Right. That's the problem. The Lakers can only offer Reggie Bullock about, $6 million, the $5.9 million taxpayer exception, most likely. And so Bullock probably can, would elect to take more money, probably just from the Knicks. And if it's not the Knicks, Andy, I would think somebody else, they love him in New York and they can sign him pretty easily. I think he is most likely to stay there, $8 to $10 million a year. And if he doesn't want to go to New York, if the Knicks for some reason decide not to keep him, there'll be another team willing to give Bullock more money at the very least than the Lakers could. So I don't think he's going to be able to be gotten in that way. So, Andy, with Reggie Bullock, who would be a credible starting candidate or a guy to play starting minutes, have that kind of role on the Lakers next season, isn't available, where can the Lakers go to get Reggie Bullock light?
Well, I preface this by saying it's a player that's not necessarily going to excite a lot of people, but for the taxpayer mid-level exception, much less the actual one, you got to be realistic about this. And a lot of those names are going to be like that. But one guy that popped to mind to me was James Ennis, who's going to be a free agent from Orlando. And he's just a really solid option. He's somebody that you can start if you need to. And I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibilities for the Lakers that could end up being the case. And he's a gap filler. He plays really hard. He's not a stopper defensively, but he's not a liability. He can go out there and compete competently. He had a really great year from behind the arc in Orlando this year, 43%. It could be considered an anomaly. It was not particularly big on volume, and his best full season before that had been 37%. He's 36% on his career. But last year, 40% on above the break threes. He'll get a lot of good looks from LeBron. They probably won't go in, because that's what happens here
when you become
LA,
a Laker, right? There's something about the air.
But you gotta have somebody though that it is at least, Brian, a good start before they eventually disappoint. But Ennis also runs the floor well in transition or off steals. And again, this team could just use more true wings. And added bonus, per Basketball Reference, his nickname is Ennis the Menace. So we can either have, in the tradition of LeBron forced nicknames upon teammates, if Dennis Schroeder stays, you have Dennis the Menace and Ennis the Menace, or if Schroeder leaves, you still have Ennis the Menace. So Ron gets his forced nickname. So
exactly
what he wants is important.
Let me throw a couple ones at you. Let me start with this one. And this is where, because we talk a lot about like the risk reward, like the Lakers do not have a lot of options. And you can make a very solid argument that the player that they use their biggest exception on, which is, again, probably going to be that taxpayer mid-level, $5.9 million a year, is somebody that has a pretty decent record of health. Ennis, by the way, was hurt a lot last year, something to think about. So with that in mind, I'm going to throw a name out at you. He's played 43 games, I believe, in the last 2 seasons. He is Otto Porter, former Bull, former Wizard, now former Magic player, potentially another teammate of James Ennis. He is probably the best player you'd be able to get for that money. And you can at least come up with a scenario. He's a very good three-point shooter, 40% for his career, good defender, just does a lot of things really well, would slide in as a natural candidate to start with this team, could finish around the rim, do all that kind of stuff, make three-pointers, and not take up a lot of space offensively in terms of usage. Perfect fit that way. You can at least squint and come up with a scenario where he would say, maybe I can get a little bit more money in total on the open market, but I could come to LA for a year, maybe a second year with an option, rehab my career by helping the Lakers win a title, then get back out as a free agent, still maybe only 30 years old, and make more money that way. So it's possible. He's too talented a player for $5.9 million, but context matters here. On the other hand, he never is on the floor. So what would you think about that name?
I would be very nervous about his availability. I mean, since the 2019 season, he has played in a grand total of 98 games. That's basically one season.
2018, 2019 forward. Yeah, it's not much. He is always hurt. There's no question. And if he gets hurt, obviously, then the Lakers have used that exception on somebody who's not available. So let me go with a couple other names that would be a lot cheaper, certainly more gettable. How about this one in terms of unsexy but potentially useful names? Tony Snell shot 57% last year from three, which probably isn't sustainable, but for his career is right at 40% almost every year.
He's a shooter. He's, a seasoned veteran. He'd be fine. He would not make anybody excited. He would make perfect sense.
And could be one of those guys again. And I think, the Bullock is a great example of it. Porter is obvious, but there's the potential for the Lakers to have that one guy where you say, how the hell is he starting for this team or playing starters minutes? And a guy like Tony Snell could be had very cheap. The other guy I thought about, Wayne Ellington, former Laker. There was about a 2-week stretch, Andy, last year where he was like the greatest offensive player in the league for Detroit, still shoots the three extremely well. That's about all he does. But again, another guy that you could look at it and say makes sense as somebody who could play big minutes on a team like the Lakers just because he can shoot.
True story, and I will share the details of it if the Lakers end up bringing him back. I once gave Wayne Ellington $20.
That's true. So it is a sobering thing, Andy, when you talk about the Reggie Bullock rumor in the Lakers' interest in him, that almost feels impossible to really bank on. And then the names that you are left with are certainly imperfect. It is something to think about as the Lakers head into free agency. What exactly will be available to them, and what happens if you make big trades, sending out a bunch of guys where you have to fill in off the free agent market? It gets really dicey really quick. So obviously, we'll stay with Locked On Lakers on YouTube, the Locked On Lakers podcast, for all the news as it comes. We'll see everybody next time.